If you are running Windows 11 version 24H2, your computer may be preparing to restart and install updates right now, whether you scheduled it or not. Across the world, users are reporting that their systems are being pushed into mandatory update cycles, downloading gigabytes of data in the background, and in some cases restarting during active work sessions. Despite configured preferences meant to prevent exactly that. This is not a malfunction. This is not a bug. This is Windows Update operating as Microsoft designed it, enforcing what they describe as critical system improvements on a timeline they control, not you. But what makes this moment different from the routine update cycles Windows users have tolerated for decades is the scale, the speed, and the sheer lack of user override available in this particular deployment phase. The question being asked in forums, support threads, and IT departments is not whether these updates are necessary. The question is whether the enforcement mechanism has crossed a line from responsible maintenance into something that fundamentally redefines what it means to own the device sitting on your desk. And the answer depends on whether you believe security justifies overriding user autonomy, or whether you believe that a computer you purchased should ultimately answer to you. To understand what is happening right now with Windows 11 24.8.2 systems, you first need to understand what 24.8.2 actually is in the context of how Microsoft versions and deploys Windows. Windows 11 is not a single static operating system. It is a continuously evolving platform that receives regular updates on multiple different schedules and through multiple different channels. There are quality updates, released monthly, that primarily address security vulnerabilities and bug fixes. There are cumulative updates, larger packages that bundle months of quality updates together. And then there are feature updates, major releases that happen once or twice a year and bring significant new functionality, interface changes, and underlying architectural improvements. These feature updates are versioned using a year and half-year notation. 22H2 was released in the second half of 2022, 23H2 in the second half of 2023, and 24H2 was released in the second half of 2024. Windows 11 version 24.8.2 is the latest feature update. It includes changes to the Start menu, improvements to the Settings app, new AI integration features including enhanced Copilot functionality, updates to File Explorer, performance optimizations, and a range of security enhancements. For users who manually check for updates and choose to install it, 24H2 has been available for months, but Microsoft does not rely on users manually choosing to update. They use a staged rollout system. Initially, the update is offered to users who explicitly seek it out. Then, it is gradually offered to wider groups of devices based on hardware compatibility, telemetry data, about system stability, and Microsoft's assessment of risk. Eventually, once Microsoft determines that the update is stable enough for mass deployment, it enters what is called the broad deployment phase. And in this phase, the update is no longer optional. It is enforced. This enforcement happens through Windows Update, the built-in service that manages all system updates. When an update reaches broad deployment status and your device is determined to be compatible and within the servicing window for your current version, Windows Update downloads the feature update in the background and schedules it for installation. You receive notifications. You see prompts suggesting that you restart to install updates. If you ignore those prompts, Windows enters a more aggressive phase. It schedules automatic restarts during times it believes you're not using the computer, typically late at night or early in the morning. It uses active hours, time windows you configure to indicate when you're normally working, to avoid restarting during those periods. But if enough time passes, if the update is categorized as critical, or if your current Windows version is approaching its end of servicing date, Windows will override your preferences. It will restart your computer and install the update even if you have not explicitly consented. This is what users are experiencing with 24H2 right now. The term forced upgrade is somewhat misleading. Microsoft does not frame it as force. They frame it as automatic servicing. The language in their documentation describes this as ensuring that devices remain secure, compatible, and supported. But from the user perspective, when your computer restarts in the middle of the night, or when you step away for lunch and you return to find that a multi-gigabyte update has been installed and your system has been rebooted without your explicit action, it feels forced. And technically, it is. Your consent was assumed under the terms of service you agreed to when you installed Windows. Those terms grant Microsoft the right to deliver updates and security patches to maintain the security and functionality of the software. You do not have the legal right to refuse updates indefinitely, at least not on Windows Home Edition. You have the right to delay them within limits. But ultimately, Microsoft retains the authority to push updates to your system. To understand why Microsoft structures Windows Update this way, and why they insist on eventually forcing updates even when users resist, you have to understand the problems they are trying to solve. And those problems are real. The first and most significant is security. Software vulnerabilities are discovered constantly. flaws in code that can be exploited by attackers to gain unauthorized access, execute malicious code, steal data, or compromise system integrity. When a vulnerability is discovered, it is often publicly disclosed, either by security researchers following responsible disclosure practices, or by attackers actively exploiting it in the wild. Once a vulnerability is public knowledge, every unpatched system becomes a target. Attackers scan the internet looking for vulnerable machines. They deploy malware designed to exploit known flaws. And if users do not install security patches, their systems remain vulnerable indefinitely. Historically, one of the biggest challenges in cybersecurity has been patch adoption. Even when patches are available, even when they are free and easy to install, users delay. They ignore update prompts. They disable update services. They defer restarts for days or weeks because they do not want to interrupt their work or because they fear updates will break something. And in the meantime, their systems are exploited. Botnets are built from millions of unpatched consumer PCs. Ransomware spreads through networks because one user did not update. Data breaches occur because a vulnerability that was patched 6 months ago is still present on systems whose owners never installed the update. Microsoft has data on this. They know that when updates are optional, adoption is slow. And slow adoption means prolonged vulnerability windows. So their solution is to make updates mandatory, remove the choice, ensure that every Windows device, regardless of user behavior, receives critical security patches within a predictable timeframe. From a security perspective, this is defensible. It reduces the attack surface. It protects not just individual users, but the broader ecosystem, because fewer vulnerable machines mean fewer nodes and botnets, fewer sources of spam, fewer vectors for malware propagation. The second reason Microsoft pushes updates is hardware and driver compatibility. Windows runs on an astonishing diversity of hardware. Thousands of manufacturers, millions of device configurations, processors from Intel, AMD, Qualcomm, ARM-based chips, graphics cards from NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, peripherals of every kind, storage devices, network adapters, printers, monitors, input devices. Each of these requires drivers, software that allows the operating system to communicate with the hardware. Drivers are updated frequently to fix bugs, improve performance, and add support for new features. When Microsoft releases a feature update like 24H2, it includes updated drivers and compatibility layers designed to work with the latest hardware. If users remain on older versions of Windows indefinitely, they cannot take advantage of new hardware. Their systems become incompatible with newer devices. Support becomes fragmented. Microsoft has to maintain compatibility and security patches for multiple versions simultaneously, which is expensive and complex. By pushing feature updates, Microsoft consolidates the user base onto fewer active versions, simplifying support and ensuring that hardware partners can target a more consistent platform. The third reason is feature standardization. Microsoft is increasingly building Windows around cloud-connected services. Copilot, the AI assistant, Microsoft 365 integration, OneDrive Sync, Xbox Game Pass, Windows Hello. All of these features rely on specific APIs, system components, and back-end services that are introduced and updated through feature releases. If a significant portion of the user base remains on older Windows versions that lack these components, Microsoft cannot deploy new cloud features effectively. They have to maintain separate code paths and legacy compatibility layers. By forcing feature updates, they ensure that the majority of devices are running recent versions with the necessary infrastructure to support new services. This benefits Microsoft's ecosystem strategy. It benefits their ability to roll out new features quickly. But it also means that users who do not want those features, who do not use cloud services, who prefer the simpler, more static experience of older Windows versions, are forced to accept changes they did not ask for. The fourth reason is enterprise management and policy alignment. In corporate environments, IT administrators need predictable update cycles. They need to know when systems will be updated, what changes will occur, and how to manage configurations across thousands of devices. Microsoft provides tools for enterprise customers, Windows Update for Business, group policies, deployment rings, that allow centralized control over update timing and rollout. But those tools only work if Microsoft maintains a consistent update schedule and enforces baseline requirements. If individual users or devices could opt out of updates indefinitely, enterprise environments would become fragmented and unmanageable. So Microsoft enforces update policies that align with enterprise needs. And consumer editions of Windows inherit much of that same enforcement structure, even though home users do not have the same management tools or requirements. From the user perspective, particularly for individuals and small businesses using Windows Home Edition, the forced nature of these updates is a persistent source of frustration. The most common complaint is timing. Windows is supposed to use active hours and usage patterns to determine when to install updates and restart. In theory, Microsoft The system learns when you typically use your computer and schedules disruptive activities during off hours. In practice, this does not always work. Users report being interrupted during work sessions, restarts happening in the middle of video calls or overnight rendering jobs, update downloads consuming bandwidth during critical tasks. The active hours feature allows you to specify a time window, but it is limited to 12 hours in Home Edition and 18 hours in Pro. If you work irregular hours, or if you use your computer at different times on different days, you cannot effectively protect all your active periods. There is also the issue of system stability. While the majority of updates install without incident, there have been cases where feature updates introduce bugs, break compatibility with specific applications or drivers, or degrade performance on certain hardware configurations. When an update is optional, users can wait, read reports from early adopters, and decide whether to install based on whether problems are being reported for their specific hardware or software setup. When an update is forced, that option disappears. You install the update whether you are ready or not, and if it breaks something critical to your workflow, you have to troubleshoot it after the fact. Rollback options exist. You can uninstall a feature update within 10 days of installation. But that process is not simple. It requires navigating recovery settings. It can fail if certain files have been deleted, and it does not help if you did not notice the problem until after the rollback window expired. Advanced users, IT professionals, and enthusiasts often try to exert more control over the update process. They use tools to delay feature updates. They modify registry settings. They disable update services temporarily. They use third-party utilities that block or defer updates. These workarounds exist in a gray area. They are not officially supported. They often break with new Windows versions, and they require a level of technical knowledge that most users do not possess. But the demand for these tools reflects a fundamental tension. Users want security. They understand the need for patches, but they also want autonomy. They want to decide when their computer restarts, what changes are installed, and when those changes occur. Microsoft's enforcement model prioritizes collective security and ecosystem consistency over individual autonomy. And for many users, that trade-off feels unacceptable. There is also frustration around the sheer size and frequency of updates. Feature updates like 24H2 can be several gigabytes. On slower internet connections or metered data plans, downloading that much data in the background can be disruptive and expensive. And once installed, feature updates often require significant disk space and can take 30 minutes to an hour to complete the installation process. During that time, the computer is unusable. For someone who relies on their PC for work, an unexpected hour-long update installation can mean missed deadlines, interrupted client calls, or lost productivity. The fact that this can happen with minimal warning and limited control compounds the frustration. What is happening with Windows 11 24.8.2 is not an isolated incident. It is part of a broader long-term shift in how Microsoft conceptualizes Windows and how they balance user control against system automation. In older versions of Windows, particularly Windows 7 and earlier, users had significant control over updates. You could configure Windows Update to notify you when updates were available, but never download or install them without explicit permission. You could review each update individually, choose which ones to install, and defer others indefinitely. This level of control was empowering for advanced users, but it also led to the security problems I described earlier. Millions of systems running outdated, vulnerable software because users chose not to update. Starting with Windows 10, Microsoft shifted toward a more automated model. Updates became more aggressive. The ability to permanently disable Windows Update was removed from the consumer interface. Feature updates were enforced after a grace period. The justification was security and consistency, and Microsoft was transparent about this shift, at least in their policy documentation. They stated explicitly that Windows 10 and later versions would require regular updates to remain supported, but the implementation felt heavy-handed to many users. The notorious forced restarts during Windows 10's early years, instances where systems would reboot during active use with minimal warning, created significant backlash. Microsoft responded by adding more granular active hours controls, better notifications, and smarter scheduling algorithms. But the core philosophy remained. Updates are mandatory. User control is limited. Windows 11 continues this trend, and in some ways, it intensifies it. The requirements for Windows 11, TPM 2.0, UEFI boot, specific processor generations, are partly about security, but they are also about ensuring that all Windows 11 devices have a baseline hardware configuration that supports Microsoft's automation and management features. Secure Boot and TPM enable features like device encryption and Windows Hello, but they also enable more robust enforcement of update policies because the hardware itself can verify system integrity and prevent tampering with update mechanisms. Windows 11 systems are harder to modify at a low level, harder to bypass built-in protections. This is good for security, but it also reduces user agency. The comparison to older operating systems is stark. Windows XP gave you near total control. You could disable services, uninstall components, defer updates indefinitely. Windows 7 refined that control with a cleaner interface, but maintained user authority. Windows 10 began the shift toward managed behavior, and Windows 11 accelerates it. The operating system increasingly behaves as if it knows what is best for you and implements that vision regardless of your preferences. This is philosophically similar to how smartphones operate. iOS and Android both enforce updates, restrict system-level access, and operate on the assumption that users should not have to manage complexity. That abstraction works for many people. It makes technology more accessible, but it also removes power from those who understand the complexity and want to control it. There is a larger industry trend here that extends beyond Microsoft. Software as a service, cloud-based infrastructure, managed devices, all of these models prioritize centralized control and consistent configuration over user autonomy. The logic is that individual users cannot be trusted to maintain security and stability, so the platform provider takes on that responsibility. And in exchange for that convenience, users surrender control. This trade has been remarkably successful from a business perspective. It enables continuous delivery of features, reduces support costs, ensures baseline security, and creates ongoing engagement with the platform. But it also means that the device you purchased increasingly does not behave like something you own. It behaves like something you lease, something managed remotely by the manufacturer, something subject to their policies and their timelines. Given the enforcement mechanisms built into Windows 11, what can users actually do to manage updates on their own terms? The options vary significantly depending on which edition of Windows you are running. Windows 11 Home Edition offers the least control. You can pause updates for up to 5 weeks, go to Settings, Windows Update, and click Pause Updates. Select a duration. This delays all updates, both quality and feature, for the time you specify. But once that pause period expires, updates resume automatically, and you must install any pending updates before you can pause again. You can configure active hours. Go to Settings, Windows Update, Advanced Options, Active Hours. Set a 12-hour window when you're typically using your computer. Windows will avoid automatic restarts during that window, but 12 hours may not be sufficient if you have an irregular schedule. Windows 11 Pro, Enterprise, and Education editions offer significantly more control. These editions include access to Group Policy Editor, an administrative tool that provides granular control over system behavior. You can configure policies that defer feature updates for extended periods, separate from quality updates. You can set how many days to defer each type of update. You can configure whether updates download over metered connections. You can control restart behavior more precisely. To access these settings, press Windows key plus R. Type gpdit.msc. Press Enter. Navigate to Computer Configuration, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, Windows Update, Manage End User Experience. Here you will find policies like Configure Automatic Updates, Specify Deadline before Auto Restart for update installation, and others that provide far more control than the Consumer Settings interface exposes. For users on Home Edition who want more control without upgrading to Pro, there are limited options. You can use registry edits to enable some group policy functionality, but this is unsupported and can be reverted by updates. You can use third-party tools, but these come with risks. Disabling the Windows Update service entirely will leave your system vulnerable and is not recommended. A more balanced approach is to stay informed. When a feature update enters broad deployment, reports appear on tech news sites and forums within days. If widespread issues are being reported, you can pause updates temporarily while the issues are being addressed, then install once stability is confirmed. It is also important to distinguish between deferring updates and blocking them entirely. Deferring is a legitimate management practice. Waiting a few weeks after a feature update releases to let early adopters identify problems is reasonable, but blocking updates indefinitely is not sustainable or safe. Security patches address actively exploited vulnerabilities. The longer you go without installing them, the higher the risk. A pragmatic approach is to install quality updates promptly and defer feature updates for a limited time to ensure stability. There are also basic hygiene practices that reduce the impact of forced updates. Keep your important work saved in close applications when you are not using them. Windows tries to avoid restarting when applications are open with unsaved work, but it is not perfect. Enable cloud backup or local backup for critical files so that even if an update causes instability, your data is protected. Review your active hour settings periodically to ensure they match your actual usage patterns. And if you know a major update is pending, schedule time to install it yourself at a convenient moment rather than waiting for enforcement. For those who truly need maximum control, alternative operating systems remain an option. Linux distributions offer near total user control over updates. You decide when to update, what to update, and whether to update at all. macOS, while also moving toward more automated updates, still provides clearer user control than Windows 11 Home. But switching operating systems is a significant commitment that most users are not willing or able to make, especially if they rely on Windows-specific software. The central tension in the Windows 11 24.8.2 forced update situation is the same tension that runs through the entire modern computing landscape. On one side, there's the need for security, stability, and ecosystem consistency. Microsoft is not wrong when they say that mandatory updates protect users from threats those users may not understand or may not prioritize until it is too late. The internet is a hostile environment. Unpatched systems are compromised daily. Botnets, ransomware, data theft. These are real harms caused in part by poor patch management. Forcing updates addresses that problem. It ensures a baseline level of security across hundreds of millions of devices. It protects not just the individual user, but the network they connect to, the services they use, the people they communicate with. From that perspective, mandatory updates are a public health measure, a collective defense mechanism that prioritizes the greater good over individual preference. On the other side is user autonomy, the principle that the person who purchased a device should have ultimate authority over how that device behaves. That if you want to run outdated software on your own hardware, accepting the risks, that should be your choice. That a computer is not a service or a platform, but a tool, and tools should answer to their owners. This perspective values control, privacy, and the ability to make informed decisions about trade-offs. It recognizes that not everyone has the same needs. A professional who relies on specific legacy software that might break with an update has different priorities than a casual user browsing the web. A security researcher testing software in isolated environments needs different control than someone using their PC for word processing and email. One-size-fits-all enforcement ignores that diversity of use cases. Both perspectives are valid, and the conflict between them is not going to be resolved because it reflects fundamentally different philosophies about technology, ownership, and risk. Microsoft has chosen a path. They have decided that the benefits of mandatory updates, the security improvements, the simplified support model, the ability to move the platform forward in a coordinated way, outweigh the costs of reduced user control. And they have the legal and technical power to enforce that choice because Windows is their software, licensed under their terms. Users who accept those terms accept the enforcement mechanisms that come with them. But here's the deeper question. This is not just about Windows. This is about the long-term evolution of personal computing. 30 years ago, a personal computer was a device you owned outright. You installed software from physical media. That software ran locally. Updates were optional. The device worked offline. Your relationship with the manufacturer ended at the point of sale. Today, that model is almost extinct. Devices require accounts. Software is cloud connected. Updates are enforced. Functionality depends on ongoing services. The manufacturer has remote access through update mechanisms, telemetry, and licensing checks. Your computer is not a standalone tool. It is a node in a managed network. And the question we are all facing, whether we have consciously considered it or not, is whether we are comfortable with that transformation. Whether we believe the conveniences, the security, the seamless integration are worth the loss of control. Whether ownership in the traditional sense still exists, or whether we have entered an era where everything is leased, managed, and governed by terms of service we have no power to negotiate. The forced updates on Windows 11 24H2 are a symptom. The diagnosis is much larger, and the prognosis is that control, once surrendered, is rarely returned.